So imagine a high-ranking politician, stepping up to a microphone to condemn a devastating terrorist attack 3 whole days before the bombs actually go off.
Yeah, that actually happened.
Right. Welcome to today's deep dive. For you, the listener, we are exploring the 1999 Russian apartment bombings using some pretty fascinating historical and forensic reports.
And just to be completely clear right up front, we are strictly looking at the anatomy of these claims.
Exactly. The allegations against the Russian security state, the FSB.
Yep.
We aren't here to endorse any geopolitical side. We're just, mapping out the source material to impart these ideas to you so we can see how this tragedy became a foundational moment for modern Russian geopolitics.
Right, because to understand that shift, you really have to look at Russia in September 1999. Over 12 days, massive explosions leveled apartment buildings in Bunyansk, Moscow, and Volgodonsk.
Over 300 sleeping citizens killed. Okay, so let's unpack this. Because late 90s Russia under Boris Yeltsin, it was basically a failing corporation facing a hostile takeover.
Yeah, his inner circle, the board of directors basically, had single-digit approval ratings.
The economy was in freefall. I mean, it was a fragile house of cards waiting for a strong gust of wind. They desperately needed a crisis to restructure everything.
Which was managed by a virtually unknown prime minister at the time, Vladimir Putin. He immediately vowed fierce retribution against Chechen terrorists.
Right. He launched the Second Chechen War.
Exactly. And he saw his approval rating rocket from 2% to 45% almost overnight.
But wait, let me push back a bit here. Isn't a sudden surge in approval, isn't that just a standard rally around the flag effect? Like any nation attack naturally unites behind its leaders.
Well, sure, a temporary poll bump is totally normal. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism here went much deeper. This crisis provided the exact pretext the Siloviki, the Russian security intelligence state, needed.
To permanently consolidate absolute power.
Yes. They didn't just win an election. They centralized media control, marginalized the parliament, and, instituted emergency measures that fundamentally shifted the country toward an authoritarian state.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting with the physical evidence. If this was a state-manufactured crisis, you'd expect them to fumble the narrative, right? And in Moscow, authorities immediately cleared the rubble.
Yeah, effectively destroying the crime scene before any independent forensic analysis could even take place.
Wow.
And they rapidly changed their official story. Early reports actually found traces of RDX at the blast sites.
Which is what, a military-grade explosive?
Highly controlled. You don't just mix it up in a garage. It's manufactured exclusively in
secure state facility.
Exactly. So when the implications of that became clear, the state suddenly pivoted and claimed the explosives were just homemade fertilizer.
Which brings us back to that politician jumping the gun. It's like a movie director yelling action before the cameras are turned on. On September 13th, Duma Speaker Gennady Seleznyov announces the Volgodonsk bombing.
But Volgodonsk didn't happen until September 16th.
3 days later.
Yeah. And when another politician questioned that impossible timeline on the floor of the parliament days later, his microphone was simply cut off.
Man. But the most glaring crack in the narrative was Ryazan, right? September 22nd.
Definitely. What's fascinating here is that residents spotted a suspicious car with obscured Moscow plates. People were unloading heavy sacks into an apartment basement.
And the local police actually intervened.
They did. They found a detonator, a timer set for 5:30 a.m., and sacks of white powder that tested positive for RDX. And the suspects they apprehended.
Let me guess.
They turned out to be active FSB agents.
Wait, really? How does an intelligence agency explain getting caught planting military explosives in a civilian basement during a nationwide bombing crisis?
Well, the head of the FSB goes on TV and declares it was just a readiness drill. The RDX was suddenly reclassified as ordinary sugar.
Sugar.
Yep. And the live detonator was dismissed as a dummy, even though local bomb squad experts on the scene insisted it was a live, viable device.
And anyone who tried to point out these massive contradictions, they didn't just lose their jobs.
They lost their lives. Independent investigators like journalist Anna Politkovskaya were shot. Alexander Litvinenko, a former FSB officer who openly alleged state involvement, was assassinated in London.
With radioactive polonium-210, right?
Exactly.
Which requires a state-run nuclear reactor to produce.
It acts as a signature. It wasn't just silencing him. It was a neon warning sign for anyone else who might dig too deep.
So what does this all mean for you? This really highlights the vital necessity of critical thinking when you're consuming state-sponsored official narratives during a crisis.
It raises an important question, right? The narrative of an omnipresent external enemy is still utilized today. Using the specter of absolute terror to justify absolute authority is a highly effective way to suppress democratic freedom.
It really is a powerful playbook. So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. If a modern nation's foundational myth is forged in the shadows of a heavily disputed, unresolved tragedy, is it ever possible for its citizens to definitively separate genuine national security crises from manufactured political theater?